How do I find a new job? How can I make a career change? And the biggest question of all, can I really find a career that I love? Hey, my name is Jen Smith, and I believe career success doesn't have to be at the expense of living a radiantly happy and healthy lifestyle. As a former HR leader and recruiter turned career coach, I get what companies are looking for when hiring top talent. What that means for you is an unmatched combination of insider knowledge and the best kept secrets about making heart-based career changes and navigating the ups and downs of job searching in today's world of work. Whether you're a recent graduate navigating the job market for the first time or a seasoned professional ready for a career change, this show is for you. So grab your coffee or your kombucha, pull up a seat, and get ready to be challenged and inspired to move beyond your self-doubt and take the right next steps towards landing a career you love. Because you deserve a long, radiantly happy and healthy career. This is the Flourish Careers Podcast. Hello, and welcome back to the Flourish Careers Podcast. I'm Jen Smith, your host, and today I'm thrilled to be here for another installment of Flourishing Together. This month, we're doing something extra special. It's an entire month of interview episodes. In honor of February, a month celebrating relationships and friendships, we're going all in with weekly conversations that will uplift and inspire. Today, I'm delighted to introduce you to Yolanda Owens. Yolanda is a career coach, award-winning author, founder of CareerSensei Consulting, and a former corporate recruiter. Yolanda has 20 years of recruiting knowledge and tricks of the trade, which you can also find featured in publications like Forbes, Newsweek, The Muse, USA Today, and the New York Post. She shares her knowledge of what employers are truly seeking in potential candidates from a recruiter's lens. And let me tell you, my friends, she is the real deal. At one point, Yolanda reviewed 403 resumes in one day. And fun fact, Yolanda and I have a lot in common, including ties to Western New York. We both spent time working as a college recruiter. Neither of us knew what we signed up for in our first jobs, and we both have decorated our offices with peel and stick wallpaper to create inspiring spaces. So Yolanda, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I have to mention that Jen was my inspiration for the wallpaper.
Oh, yay. Yes, Yolanda and I met over Zoom and we were talking about my peel and stick wallpaper. And then I think like a week later, yours was like up and just as beautiful and so much fun. So we kind of geeked out over peel and stick wallpaper together, which was really fun.
That's our trauma bond.
Yeah, it is a lot harder than it looks, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, this is going to be easy peasy. And I was just like, needed an anger management course after I put it out.
It's worth it. I have to say it's worth it because yours looks really, really good. So
thank you. Likewise, I'm still obsessed with yours.
Thank you. Well, today we are going to tap into all your expertise as a recruiter over the years, much of which you share in your book, How to Score a Date with Your Potential Employer, which I am obsessed with. But before we dive in, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your career path. So in your book, you joke that you majored in indecisiveness during college. Yes. And the early years, you started your career as an underwriter, not knowing what it was. And then through multiple transitions, you found a role in recruiting that really combined your strengths and your interests. So can you tell us more?
Yeah. Like you said, I majored in indecisiveness. I changed my major 4 times within my first 2 years of college. I did graduate in 4 years. I have no idea how I did it. I graduated with honors. My parents were convinced that I was going to be the oldest living senior on an AARP scholarship.
Oh my God.
It was insane. And then I took this job as an underwriter. It sounded sexy. I was just like, yeah, underwriter. And they moved me to Hartford, Connecticut, which I thought was going to be sexy. Most boring place on the face of the planet. Everything shuts down at 6 o'clock. And I absolutely hated it. And so I was in this manager training program, and I tell people I lived the real world before it actually happened. There were 13 of us. We lived on one floor of a hotel room with adjoining rooms, one common lounge and refrigerator. And the epics that happened during that, it was insane. So after 6 months, I said, peace out. And I went back to my alma mater and I worked in college admissions. So I was at my alma mater for 2 years, and then I moved to another university where I became the assistant director of admissions. I was there for several years. And then ended up getting a call from a friend of mine about a college recruiting job. I fell in love with that and did that for like the next 15 years.
Oh my gosh. I think it just goes to show, especially early in our career, which we'll probably get into in a little bit here, but early in our career, it's like sometimes we just don't know. When you're 17 years old and have to pick a major and make all these life decisions, it's really hard.
I think it's reverse. You should be allowed to go live a little bit and then go and decide what you want to major in, because at that point you have no lived experiences. And even once you graduate college, you don't have enough to be able to make it. You have no benchmark.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's kind of backwards the way the education system is.
I could not agree with you more. And I also think that that's good guidance too for folks that are early in their career. Like, hey, it's okay to go out and explore and try things and do experiments and test and figure out what you like and don't like, because there's no other way really to do it. So
yeah, that's what your 20s are for. That's what 20s are for. I say 20s are your spaghetti throwing stage. You need to throw some things against the wall and see what sticks.
I think that's awesome. I'm going to write that down and remember that, because it's true. It's really true. It's about that exploration. And if you set that expectation for yourself early, then when you are navigating and making changes in different decisions, I think it makes it a lot easier versus going into something thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to have this all figured out, or I have to stay in this job because they hired me for, So I remember feeling that early. I don't know if you felt this too, but it was like, they took a chance on me. Like they hired me. I have to try to do my best. And I, never leave this organization. There was like this loyalty, like this sense of loyalty because they hired me, but that's not really reality. So yeah.
No, I think it was a reality when our parents were coming up, and I think they kind of passed that down to us. But I mean, times change, and you kind of have to change to meet times where they are. And loyalty doesn't exist anymore in the
doesn't.
place. So you have to give yourself permission to own your own happiness.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I mentioned your book before. I'm obsessed with the fact that you wrote a book comparing job searching to dating. It's so similar in so many ways. So this is such a creative and relatable book to read. One of the things that stood out to me was how you talk about job seekers determining their ideal employer type and how to avoid pitfalls like chasing roles that might lead to dissatisfaction, like marrying for money. So can you talk to us about how you coach folks to find their ideal employer type?
Yeah. The biggest thing is asking questions. And asking questions early on in the interviewing stage. And the other thing is also being upfront about yourself. I do a lot of resume writing. So often what I'll tell people to do is either in their cover letter or in the profile section at the top of the resume, I'll tell them to write a little something about themselves, how they operate, what their career persona is, what kind of work environment makes them feel productive and purposeful, what their management style is, what they're looking for in their next role in terms of learnings and challenges. And that tends to be a weeding out process for companies who find that attractive. That you're starting a conversation with like-minded people. Anyone who kind of snubs their nose at that, then you're dodging a bullet. So that's a really good weeding out process. And then making sure that you're asking questions. I think we're kind of conditioned to ask questions in an interview just for the sake of asking questions, because we're told you're not supposed to, it's uncouth not to ask a question in an interview. But you need to be intentional with your questions as well. You don't ask a question just for the sake of asking it. Ask questions that matter to you and to make sure that you're going to be set up for success in whatever role that you're going to be taking on, and that you understand the role as well.
Yes.
One of the key questions I tell people, if you don't ask anything else, is what do I need to know about the job that wasn't in the description?
That's a great question.
Because oftentimes, this is coming from my recruiter's lens, a lot of times these job postings have been, repurposed. They haven't been updated since Christ was a child. So, The job description that you apply to and what the actual job is can be two completely different things. So, you want to make sure that you're answering questions or what you're talking about is in parallel with what they're what they're offering to you.
Yes.
You get that clarity and you have that understanding. So, you go into the conversation with the right frame of mind, the right types of questions and the right kinds of responses and examples to give to showcase and market yourself.
Yes, 100%. And one of the things that came to mind as you were talking was first doing that like self-assessment and that self-reflection to know exactly what you're looking for, just like you would in a date. Somebody you're going on a date with, you know what you're looking for. So what are those requirements? And then asking the questions to get to know that employer, just like you would on a date, and making sure that it's going to be a good fit. So it's that self-reflection and then those amazing questions that you just shared.
Yeah. And, another point to that is that, I'm not a fan of telling people what you think they want to hear.
Right.
Because, that's setting yourself. That's essentially catfishing at the end of the day. You're comparing it to the whole dating scenario. That's classic catfishing. They meet this person and they fall in love with that person. And then you get there on your first day of work and they're like, who the heck is this? So, make them fall in love with you, flaws and all. That's one thing that I always tell my clients. If they can fall in love with you, flaws and all, then you know that you can be yourself at work, because what they fall in love with, you're going to have to fake that funk for the whole time that you're there.
I think that is such good advice because it's true. And then you're going to have to feel like you have to be somebody that you're not. And that's going to just waste so much time and energy of your own, and you're going to be miserable. And so why not figure it out in the forefront? And I think that also a lot of times people going into interviews feeling like they have to like prove themselves or sell themselves or whatever. But I always say that same thing too. It's like you should be interviewing the employer as much as they're interviewing you, because you want to make sure it's going to be that good match. So
exactly.
Now I want to switch gears here because you talk a lot about high achievers and job seekers setting goals for themselves and these realistic expectations. This is so critical in the job search process. So talk to us a little bit about how folks can balance ambition with the reality of a job search.
Yeah, not just even with a job search, but just in your career in general. There is a piece of advice that I use to this day, which is under promise and over deliver. So under promise, meaning that you don't give all your cards away. You pull back a little bit and you know that you're able to do more than that. So you always promise less than what you're able to deliver. And then you always turn out like a rock star. Say, for example, I have a deliverable or I'm doing a resume for someone. I know I'm going to get it done in a day or two, but I'll tell them a week. And then when I give it to them in 3 days, they think I'm like the greatest thing since sliced bread. So, that whole under promise and over deliver has been something that's, been paramount for me in my career. And then in your job search, there are so many aspects of the job search that are outside of your control. And overachievers tend to ruminate over that. And this is the biggest piece of advice that I give to job seekers. I just like focus on what you can control. And there's two things that you can control in a job search: your narrative, talking about yourself with three things: your narrative, talking about your experiences with confidence, and making sure that you're asking questions. So you're not walking into an experience that's not in line with what you want.
That is really good advice because there is so much that's outside of our control in the job search process, and focusing on what you can control and even thinking about what you can control, I think takes it to another level from that perspective and figuring out how to manage expectations. So, and I love how you focus on these three things: the narrative, the confidence, and the asking questions. And I mean, I guess the other thing that I would say that kind of comes to mind there is when you're trying to manage your own expectations, this other piece around the industry that you're interested in and understanding what's happening in that industry, I think is also a really good piece of information while you're trying to figure out how to manage those expectations. So like I think about like the tech industry, sometimes they move at like lightning speed. And so you can do that research and find out in terms of the expectations and how quickly something might move, or, how quickly you might end up landing a job or not landing a job. Like, you might know that it's going to be a lot faster based in that industry. Maybe another industry, like let's say higher ed or education, might be a little bit slower or have very strict timelines. So I think there's some of like the research that you can do to help control those expectations a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense or resonates at all.
No, that makes total sense. If you understand that, then you can set that in your mind and know that, people want to say, oh, I'm going to find a job in 2 weeks. Let's be realistic about that.
Yeah.
Or someone will say that, I had a client recently who said, okay, I'm going to do 100 cold calls this week. I'm like, no, you're not. You're going to do 5.
Yes, don't kill yourself. That's crazy.
You're going to do 3 to 5. Set realistic expectations, because you need to be able to celebrate a win. And if you go into that saying that I'm going to do 100 and you only do 20, you're going to see that as a failure and you're going to continue with it. So start small. Start with, I'm going to do 2 or 3. And then if you get 5, great. That's going to motivate you to do even more. But start small and grow from there. That way, like I said, you have some wins to celebrate and you keep yourself motivated.
Yeah, that's huge. I think that's great advice too, to start small and celebrate the wins and just keep climbing and growing and then do what works. So I think, to your point, when you start small and you're celebrating those wins, you're noticing what's working, and then you can do more of that versus having these big lofty goals that may or may not even work. So.
Exactly. And it helps you focus as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because you could be totally scattered. Especially I noticed that when people are in between jobs and they have like all day and they're just like, I don't know where to go or what to do first. And then they end up doing nothing because they're so overwhelmed. And so just like one tiny thing, I talk about my favorite time management is 5 minutes to flourish. So just spend 5 minutes on one tiny thing and then take it from there. So instead of like thinking you have to spend 8 hours job searching, just do one thing and then go from there. So. Now, you relate a resume to a dating profile, which once again is so creative and fabulous. And you talk about emphasizing simplicity, truthfulness, and swagger, which you have the most fabulous acronym. Are you okay if I share what that acronym is? So when writing a resume, Yolanda's acronym is STAR. So make them see stars: simple, truthful, assertive, results-driven, and swagger, which is the best acronym I've ever heard for resume writing. And it's just so good. So now that we know you've reviewed thousands and thousands and thousands of resumes in your career, what key elements make a resume stand out to recruiters? And maybe what are some common mistakes people make?
I think what stands out is when I'm able to see accomplishments. So typically what people do is write a resume and they list every daily duty that they've done since like their 3rd grade spelling. That's not necessarily going to get you anywhere. And it's also not going to get you anywhere to kind of pepper your resume with a constellation of key search words. That doesn't tell me anything. That means that you're really good at tricking the system, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to do the job.
Right.
Great that you know how to use keywords and you can intersperse them. But again, I want to know what you've done. So showing me what you've done, yes, you may have those keywords, but I need your resume bullet points in your experience to back up those claims. So if you can show me things that you've done that moved the needle, added value, made the job better than when you started in it, that's what I want to see, because those are the kind of things that I'm going to want to have a conversation with you about.
Yes.
So if I can get a taste of that up front, then that makes for conversation points for other aspects of the job search.
I love that you mentioned it gives you a point to have a conversation about, because that's really what the resume is. And it's true. I've seen a million resumes that it's like a play-by-play of their entire life. And that's not what we're looking for. We want it to be succinct and we want to know what you've done to start a conversation. So you don't have to put every single thing on there. Just put something that's going to jump out and grab attention. And then you'll have a conversation about it when you get to the interview. I feel like I say the words You can use that when you get to the interview. A lot of times when I'm reviewing a resume or there's like a paragraph or like one bullet with like 10 sub bullets, I'm like, no. That's the interview. That's the interview conversation. Use that header to start the conversation. So that's a really good point. It's like a marketing
My rule
tool.
of thumb is a resume should give enough information to pique a reader's interest and leave enough out to want to continue the conversation.
Yes, 100%.
That's the sweet spot. So if you're able to do that, then, that's golden. And, for job seekers who are a little further along in their career, I always have to give them permission to that your resume doesn't have to look like it did when you were in college. Writing a resume, reverse chronological order of every job that you ever had isn't the narrative that you necessarily want. So you need to write the resume where you want that employer to see you.
Yes. Curate your story. I always tell people, you get to curate the story that you want others to know about you. It does not have to be that play-by-play. So yeah, that's huge. Now, I have to ask, the word swagger is fabulous. How does somebody add swagger to their resume?
That's just confidence. That is,
nice.
The kind of showing the confidence in your ability. I feel like that is 99.9% of getting a job is being able to show people that you're confident in your abilities. Even if you're not, if you sound, because we all work with incompetent people.
Right.
And, there was a study that was shown, I don't remember how long ago the study was, but the United States was compared to some other countries, and they were just like, what differentiates, Americans from other people? And it was their confidence. Even if they didn't have experience in the area, they were able to show confidence and people liked them or thought that they were competent in doing something. So if you can show the confidence and people buy into that, you're golden. Honestly, if you sound confident in your abilities, they're going to be. So not going into an interview apologizing for what you don't want to do.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's really, that's a really big deal because sometimes I feel like as a recruiter too, you interview somebody and they're so nervous and, scared and all of these things. And it's just not a good look when you go. And even if you are nervous, like figure out ways to get the nerves out before you even go into that interview or into that conversation. And I talk a lot about energy. It's that energy too. Like if you're portraying that confident energy, like, yes, I'm going to come in and get this job done and I'm going to roll up my sleeves and figure it out. If I don't know how to do everything, that's okay. Like I'm going to figure it out. And that's the energy I think employers are looking for.
Yeah. And, in terms of getting over those jitters, an exercise I always tell people to do, and this is just, a Jedi mind trick, act like you already have the job.
Ah, there you go.
Act like you already have the job or treat it like an intake call.
Yes.
Because once people hear that word interview,
I know,
it deems them incapable of communicating. And it's like, you have these kind of conversations all the time. It's nothing more than the conversation about, you getting to know them getting to know you, and you figure out how best to work together.
Exactly. Sometimes I think of it as like a business conversation, like just go into this like a business conversation. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. A lot of times folks are like, oh, it's a performance and the spotlight is on me. And it's really not. Like, think of it as a business conversation. Have a conversation with somebody. Think of it like a date. You're getting to know them. They're getting to know you, and then move on from there. Now, go back to the resume for 1 second. I wanted just to ask you, what are some common mistakes people make on their resumes that you would recommend they avoid?
More than likely, the person looking at your resume is only going to take a 7 to 10 second cursory glance at it. So make sure that you're keeping it short and succinct, and that the points that you put on there are going to showcase what you do best in alignment with the types of roles that you're applying to.
Yes, I agree. Now, I have to ask you one more question related to this. What are your thoughts on resume design?
I love creative resumes, but that's just me because I'm a creative person.
Yeah.
But in the era of AI and applicant tracking systems, it's best to keep it simple. If you want to showcase the flourish, then bring that along with you to an interview, or, once you get an interview, you can send that fancy copy to them.
Yeah.
But I think, it's great to be able to show your personality and a resume. Yeah. It's what, differentiates you. But like I said, in the age of standardization, to do that initial application, keep it vanilla and then add the spice later.
I love that. I think that's great. That's great advice. And when I think of swagger too, because I always tell people too to try to add a little splash of personality to your resume. And you can do that with like a dash of design, I think, but the overly designed stuff just doesn't work. I completely agree with that because I've gotten things through the applicant tracking system and it was totally jumbled. Like their name was like across the side and things were it just doesn't work. And you don't know what software the company's using, whether or not it's going to translate or not. So just make it simple and standard. And then I think that's great advice to add a little flourish, add a little swagger, once you or if you're emailing your resume directly to somebody, you can add a little bit more design and share it that way. So good call. Now, we all know that networking is one of the most important pieces that we can do in our job search. And I love in your book, you said, be interested and interesting. So what strategies do you recommend for professionals to build these connections? And especially for those who might find networking intimidating?
Yeah, I'm a classic introvert. So, networking is like getting a root canal.
Same.
But, you can find ways that work for you. Something that I do and networking isn't a one and done thing. I think people think that you go to one event and then that's it. Networking is something that you have to constantly build and cultivate on. And it's also a lot about reciprocity. So, building connections and keeping in contact with those people is really, really important. So you're always staying top of mind, even if they don't get out and reach out to you. So one of the things that I do, I love to write and I love staying connected with people, but I don't necessarily, want to be face to face. So email has become my best friend. So once a quarter, I make sure that I communicate with my entire network. I may send out a mass email just letting them know what I'm up to or, wish them happy Groundhog's Day or happy Thanksgiving or what have you. And it's great because, I'm keeping in contact with people. It's not something that's invasive. I'm not necessarily asking them for something, but I'm keeping in touch. And if I ever do need something from them, it almost guilts them into helping me. They're like, oh my God, she's always so good about keeping in touch. Yes, I have to do this, or I'm always top of mind. And like I said, even if, people don't respond to me, help comes from unexpected places. A prime example of this is, you just never know where help is going to come. Like I said, I send these emails out 3 or 4 times a year. And, when I do ask for help, it never comes from the person that I sent the email to. It'll always be someone who reaches out to me and be like, hey, I'm a friend of so-and-so, and they let me know that you need this. So it's always through that 6 degrees of separation and always know that help is going to come from unexpected places. Also, I have this cheesy Thanksgiving email that I send out every year. And a couple of years ago, my husband and I were traveling for Thanksgiving and I didn't send it out. And let me tell you, people who had never, ever responded to this email before in like a decade were emailing me saying, are you okay? You sent this email out every year and I didn't get it. They were like ready to send out the National Guard because I didn't send out this email. So they just let you know that even if people aren't responding, they're paying attention to you.
Right.
So no response doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't working on your behalf in the background.
Mm-hmm. That's fabulous. I love the idea of that help comes from unexpected places. And I also believe that it's true that most people want to genuinely help other people as long as they know how to help. So when you need help and asking for help, and maybe it's not a direct, like you just said, maybe it's more indirect, but most people want to genuinely help others. And that's what networking is. It's not walking into a conference with a name tag and feeling like you have to ask strangers for jobs. It's all about building long-term relationships. And what a fun, simple way to do that through a quarterly newsletter. It's a fabulous recommendation. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
As someone who has reviewed thousands of resumes in a single day and worked on both sides of the hiring process, tell us one secret about job searching that most candidates don't know but should.
Recruiting is not logical at all. So
tell me more.
There is no magic formula. It's not like recruiting is A plus B equals C. Not at all whatsoever. It's probably the most subjective thing that you could ever think about. So, people ask me, what's the formula? There is no formula. I feel like the goalpost changes continuously, based on people's, personalities and preferences. And trust me, I've seen hiring decisions made about the dumbest things you could ever imagine. So knowing that there is no logic, and going back to what I was saying before, so, you can't worry about all those behind the scene things because you can't control that, and you can't control how someone perceives you, or what they're thinking, or what their preferences are. So, focusing on what you can control, which is your own narrative, your confidence, and, asking questions. But no, that's the biggest piece. The most common question is just like, what's the magic formula? How do I beat this? You don't, because the goalpost changes too often, and it's not based on logic at all whatsoever.
You're right. And it's true. I hear that a lot about, especially with like ATSs, like this, the infamous ATS and how it works. And it's software. It's going to be different for every company, most likely. I mean, there's some big ones that a lot of companies use, but you don't know what they're even putting in there, So when you think about just getting through that first phase, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Like, you cannot control it. 100% you cannot control it. And there really is no formula. And I'm glad that you said that. And there is so much subjectivity that goes into it. You just don't know, and you can't take it personal, and focus on what you can control is really good guidance for sure. Now, I always like to wrap up these conversations with a flourishing favorite. So what's one book besides your book, podcast, or another resource that has had a significant impact on your career, and why would you recommend it to our listeners?
Oh, it's so funny. I've listened to the podcast, and I know that this is a question. And to be honest with you, this is probably the most difficult question for me. I have no idea. I've been sitting and thinking, I'm like, oh my God, what do I say to this question? I don't know, because it's not one thing. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I read constantly. And, that's how I keep myself informed. So I can't say that there's any one thing. I think the thing that served me best is I still read the newspaper every day.
Oh, good for you.
Maybe not a physical newspaper, but, I get, the newsletters that come 2 or 3 times a day in my inbox.
Yeah.
Keeps me, up to date on things, whether, it's career-wise or just what's going on in the world or in business. And to understand trends. So when I'm working with people, or if I'm having conversations, or if I'm networking, I know what's going on in the world and can have intelligent conversations, or at least be part of the conversation and not feel like a wallflower. I feel like I'm being able to contribute. So I know I must sound like a dinosaur, but if anything has served me well, I grew up with a grandmother who read the newspaper every night before she went to bed. And then it just got me into the habit of reading before I go to bed, or first thing in the morning. And that's the first thing that I do, is I read a newspaper when I get up.
That is great guidance, because you're right. It does help in all of the scenarios that you just mentioned, and especially staying up on trends and what people are talking about. And when you get into a conversation with someone, you have something that's top of mind that you looked at that morning that you could have a conversation about. So I think that's fabulous guidance. And my dad would be thrilled. I have to tell you, he was the design director at the Buffalo News for 35 years. So he would be so happy to hear this.
Oh my God, now I want to have a conversation with him.
Yes, we are newspaper fans in this world. Another thing we have in common, Yolanda.
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, well, this has been such a fun conversation. Where are you out on the interwebs? Where can people find you?
Oh, you can find me just about anywhere. I have a website, CareerSensei.com. You can find me on Instagram, CareerSensei. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Yolanda Owens.
Perfect. We will put all of that in the show notes. Yolanda, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing all this realistic wisdom. It has been such a joy.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so much fun. I don't think I've had and giggled this much all week long. So thank you.
I love it. As always, listeners, the notes from today's episode will be on the blog at flourish.careers/blog. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll talk to you next time.